This morning's reading is from Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46. The final judgment. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal fire. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be with you this morning and to listen to the praise team and join in singing praise to God. And in an odd way, it's a great pleasure to hear that, in some ways, rather scary text that was read to you. But let me start out with a not particularly edifying story about that text. If you go to Dublin, Ireland, and go to St. Patrick's Cathedral of the Church of Ireland, that's the equivalent of Anglican there, you will find that the people who gave the most money over now the centuries to that church were the Guinness family. Yes, that Guinness family. And along one of the side walls, there's a plaque. And the plaque is in honor of one of the women of the Guinness family. And immediately above the plaque is a verse from this passage. "I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink." Well, we might as well laugh, because judgment isn't a laughing matter. And it can be scary. It can be scary for a lot of us. Now, we do also make jokes about judgment, but I think it's the case with us human beings that sometimes we deal with our fears by joking, and so it is with all those rather uncomfortable jokes about demons poking us with forks and lightning bolts missing us on the golf course when we swear a little too much. It may seem scary. It is appointed to humans, to mortals, once to die, and after that, the judgment. You might see that driving along a rural highway in Ontario on a billboard in a farmer's field. And I don't know about you, but it's a little scary to me. And traditionally, we preachers have adopted the scare the hell out of them technique in our preaching. The most famous sermon of this type is called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God" by a man called Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards was a great Christian leader. It's a rather scary sermon. You can find it online if you want. The classic fire and brimstone sermon. Well, amidst your fears, I do have some good news for you. And that is that the judge likes you. The judge cares for you. The judge gave his life for you. As you listen to this text, as you read it and ponder upon it, remember who the judge is and that the judge does love you. That verse about judgment in the farmer's field, by the way, it's in the middle of an entire chapter about what God in Christ has done for us in love. And this is what follows it immediately. And as it's appointed unto mortals once to die, but after this the judgment, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many. And unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. The judge likes you. By all means, take seriously, very seriously, what the text says and what I will say about judgment this morning, but in a non-fearful way, if that is possible. You know, those cartoons and jokes about thunderbolts and demons with pitchforks. Well, there are no thunderbolts, there are no demons with pitchforks in this text. Just depart from me. Be apart from me forever. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is scary after all, because that's a far worse thing than thunderbolts. It's a far worse thing than pitchforks. The great C.S. Lewis, who died in November 1963, 60 years ago now, 60 years this week, said there are two kinds of people in the end. Two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, well then, thy will be done. Have it your way. That's the judgment. But there is something particular and special about the judgment in this case. And there is a painting, and a friend sent me a copy of it by email this past week. Can we have it on? Okay. As you can see, this painting is called The Pardon at Brittany. And the name of the author, who's a 19th century Frenchman, is Pascal Adolphe Jean Bagnon Bouveret. Well, quite a name, isn't it? I'm glad it's up on the screen and I didn't have to memorize that. It's a religious occasion. One of the things about this artist was that he was one of the first to use photographs to make sure that his paintings were accurate. And there's actually a photograph behind this. It's a religious procession in the province of Brittany in northwest France. And though France is very, very secular in the present day, it's still more religious than most parts of France. The Pardon at Brittany. These are people afraid of judgment and seeking to be right with God. And you can see they're dressed. Maybe you can pick out their facial expressions. They look very, very grim. They're carrying candles. But what's interesting is that there's a figure on the ground. Can you see her? And if you could see her more closely than I think is the case this morning, you would see that she's holding up a begging bowl. And it's empty. These people are seeking God's forgiveness in the judgment. They want pardon. And they walk by the beggar on the road. It makes me think of Matthew chapter 25. If you look at the figure, it's a young woman and she's exposed. Her shoulders exposed. I'm going to make a guess about how she's been making her living. Perhaps it might be your guess too. But she's not doing that anymore. She's not doing that now. If she were, she wouldn't need to beg from others. And she's beautiful. And the other figures are anything but beautiful. It reminds me of Matthew chapter 25. So people in Brittany, in Etobicoke, seek to avoid judgment. We engage in religious activities, and sometimes we pass by on the other side. And it's pretty clear that Jesus doesn't think that's a good thing. But in the end, this story isn't just about a future event at the end of time or at the end of our lives. It is about what matters to Jesus now. And if it matters to Jesus, it ought to matter also to those of us who wish to be like Jesus and who wish to follow him now. And I trust that's all of us. Now, you're probably thinking, there are so many beggars, I can't possibly help them all. You might be wondering if your face is among those in that procession in Brittany or its equivalent in Etobicoke. There are so many of them, and I understand that. I do understand that something really unusual happened to me driving to church this morning, something that rarely happens driving around Toronto. You know what it was? Nobody was standing by any of the intersections with a homemade sign saying, "No food, please help." Because you know very well that's what you see regularly, and not just downtown near the inner city missions, but in Etobicoke also, where you live, at an intersection near you. Does it mean if we drive on by that we are those who ignore Jesus? There are so many of them. We can't help them all. And quite true, you're right, we can't help them all. But we can help some. A couple of thoughts. My late father was involved in the Scott Mission in downtown Toronto. He served on the board for many years and cared deeply about the poor. As a boy, he'd grown up on a farm in Saskatchewan, and half the farm was taken away by a financial institution in the 1930s. And I've been told, not by him because he never said it to me, but by others, that he used to go to school barefoot to spare his shoes in Saskatchewan. Well, he cared about the beggars. He cared about the poor. But he told me never actually to give money to them because he believed that many, and he was probably right, had a problem with alcohol and they would take the money and spend it on booze. Well, I don't think it's just alcohol, at least not anymore, though it is certainly still the case that alcohol is a terrible social problem. It's also drugs, and that's even worse. And in our case, in our community, and in our country as a whole, very often it's people who have a mental illness of one sort or another. And what comes first, the addiction or the illness? I don't know, you don't know, God knows. And Dad's advice was, keep track of the people who ask you for money. What would you do if you really were faced by a beggar and you couldn't get away, you couldn't drive on by? What would you do? Would you reach into your pocket and get a toonie or a loonie? Would you reach into your pocket and simply get a quarter? Well, every time you come across a beggar, keep track of that beggar and give that quarter, give that loonie, give that toonie to the Scott Mission or the Evangel Hall or the Daily Bread Food Bank or the countless number of wonderful charities that help the poor in our city and in our community. And I think that's still good advice 60 years later. And in the end, it's about attitude in many ways. Don't stop caring. For Christ's sake, don't stop caring. And it's not a social problem or anything so abstract as that. It's seeing that person not as a social problem, but as a child of the living God. That person with the homemade sign saying, "Please help, no food," is a child of God, or in our text, he's the child of God. He is the Lord Jesus to you in that moment. Don't stop caring. And don't let our politicians stop caring either. And another thing, it's not just about individual people. It's about the church as a whole, as a community, and as a family. Does this church family take care of the people among us? And that care takes many, many different forms. Even in our Bible text, there's a whole list of different ways to show the love for others that is also simultaneously the love for Jesus. Why, there's feeding the hungry, there's giving drink to the thirsty, there's visiting the sick, there's clothing the naked, there's visiting in prison. And it's a representative list, not an exhaustive list. One could go on and on and on, listing the ways it is possible presently to help the Lord Jesus and to show our care. But you don't do all of them. You can't. There'll be one of them that's a calling for you, but not the whole lot. I can tell you, for example, that business about visiting prison. I have visited in prison. I went to the old Dawn jail before it was closed down, and what a miserable, horrible place it was. It was terrible. And in fact, one of the 2 times that I was there in a room with one of the inmates whom I'd been asked to visit, there was a riot in the prison, and they locked me in with the prisoner. Now, the interesting thing is that I was scared. I mean, the man was about 5'8", and I was still just about a rugby player at that moment. I wasn't in any immediate danger. They locked me in to keep me safe, for heaven's sakes. But I was scared. I think fear is one of the things that keeps us from doing what is right, is it not? I was scared. But one of the things I did realize, it wasn't my calling to visit in prison. I have friends who do have that calling, and God bless them. They're doing a wonderful thing, but it's not necessary for me to do that because that's not my calling. But it is the church is calling. Does the church pass by on the other side, or does the church stop and care as a whole? It's not just about the individual. It's about the Christian community. It's about the family. You know, if they're children of God, because in reality those people are Jesus to us, they're our brothers and our sisters, and we care about the family. One of those ways, one of those callings will turn out to be yours. And in the end, you know, there are people in this passage that get it right. And there are still people, and there are still churches that also get it right. Many years ago, when I was first teaching at Knox College, it was a cold and miserable winter in Ontario. And one of my students came in to see me and told me a story about the place where he was preaching, filling in while the church was without its own minister. He said that it was a church I won't identify, in the downtown of one of our smaller Ontario cities, but it wasn't so small a city that it did not have a downtown and it did not have homeless people. There were homeless people in that small city also, and as I say, it was miserably and brutally cold. And he was sitting in the empty minister's office, no books on the shelves, getting ready for his sermon, putting the final touches on, getting just the words just right, when a church lady bustled in. And the church lady said to him, "Jeff, you're a big man, and there's a homeless person who's come into our church, and he stinks, and I want you to come with me and throw him out. Well, you know, church ladies can be very, very impressive and very hard to say no to. And he was just a student and just a guest, so he followed her into the sanctuary, and sure enough, she was quite right. There was a homeless person in the church, and she was also quite right. He stank. And his clothes were torn and stained, and he smelt as if he had passed the night in a dumpster, which is probably exactly what he had done to stay warm, by the way. And his shoes were cracked and down at heel, and the worst thing was he had no socks. And his ankles were blue with the cold. Now, Jeff told me that Sunday he was preaching on this text. Inasmuch as you have done it or not done it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you've done it to me. And he said it was as if he could hear the Master saying to him, I was cold and I had no socks and my ankles were blue and you threw me out onto the street. And he was just working up the courage to say no to the church lady, that he wouldn't throw the man out, when he realized that she wasn't the only kind of church lady in that congregation. There was another one who'd prepared a sandwich for the man and brought it in to him in the church in the front pew where he was sitting. And the clerk of session, the main elder of the church, another older woman, was sitting down beside the man and talking to him politely as if he were a guest in their church. But Jeff said the best thing of all was that a little girl, maybe 7, 8 years old, came up to the man and gave him a pair of rolled up socks, men's socks. And I said, Jeff, that's a wonderful story. Can I use it sometime in a sermon? And Jeff said, surely, surely. But there was one little detail that I didn't get, and I do like to get the details right if I can in a story. I didn't quite understand one thing. Where did the socks come from? And of course, one possibility occurred to me that there was a clothes closet in that church. Many churches do have clothes closets. They save clothes to give to refugees or other people in need. So I said, was there a clothes closet in that church? And he said, no, there isn't one in that church. And I don't know where the socks came from. So what I'm about to tell you is just a guess. A guess. It's my guess, nothing more. But I can't figure anything else out. Where would a 7-year-old girl get socks? I think she got them from her father. Where else could she get them? I think in that church there was a little girl with the love of Jesus in her heart and a very proud father with a warm heart and cold feet. Sometimes we do get it right. Wouldn't it be nice to get it right? Wouldn't it?